get this started. So happy Wednesday to everybody that is on the phone and joined us. I think we should have a really interesting hour for you today. This is probably number 6 or 7, I think, in our happy hour webinar series that we've conducted. It's been fun to get to host for my part. Certainly we've had some really interesting and different kind of conversations about really enabling businesses through technology. So looking forward to today's very much because it's kind of near and dear to our hearts and with our very specific target market in life sciences. So appreciate everybody being part of the attendees and the panelists being part of it today. So sometimes I'll kind of tee things off with just a couple slides, but I think for today, just keep it casual. I did just want to remind everybody, if you go to ptp.cloud, we've got a resource page that has archives of these webinar events. We've got our blogs up. We've got quite a bit of content that's interesting and should be valuable learning material. So check us out there. We're also very vocal on LinkedIn, sharing a lot of what we've got going on, a lot of what our partner AWS has going on. So maybe give us a follow on LinkedIn. And then lastly, just wanted to announce that through our partner AWS and through our partner Ingram, PTP is going to be hosting some APN immersion days over the next month and a half. So we'll be doing half-day sessions, kind of deep dive AWS technology sessions on subsequent weeks for a 3-week period. So be on the lookout on the ptp.cloud events page for registration. And obviously, if anybody's interested, either reach out to me, hit us up on our website, or reach out to your account manager if you've got one, and we'll certainly get you connected there. So wanted to go through and just introduce obviously myself and then the panelists, and then we'll get into some of the questions that we've got set up for today to kind of dig through this biotech. So part of what we do is this is, since we can't all be together and be hanging around like a Percival brewery that's by the PTP office, it's essentially, we call it a virtual happy hour panel discussion. So if for those that are interested, I'll kind of introduce what we're having. So I'm keeping it fairly basic today. So in the past, I've kind of kept close to either local breweries, or when I've been up in Colorado, something there. This time I just kind of went with a fairly standard Stone IPA, and Stone's a larger brewery, not the kind of macro brewery, but this one's a Tangerine Express Hazy IPA. I figured since it was in Texas 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that kind of tangerine citrusy thing may help keep me going for the rest of the day. So my name is Gary Derheim. I'm responsible for marketing and managed services at PTP. And so I'll be kind of your Julie McCoy cruise director and moderator as we go through the hour. And with that, I want to introduce the panelists that we've got, and I'll start on the PTP side. And Bill, why don't you just kick us off and just give a brief background, and then we'll go to Ethan. Mute.
Got to be ever vigilant for the
There you go.
Yeah, Gary, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the panelist. I'm freshly out of beer, so I'm going to switch it up. I'm going with a Cape Codder, just in the spirit of summer. Light on the Cape, heavy on the Codder. So hopefully I make it through the panelist round. I'm a cloud architect here at PTP, and I'm pleased to join with the rest of the panelists.
Awesome, thanks. Ethan?
Sure. So Ethan Simmons, managing partner at PTP. I also manage most of the AWS relationship. So spend a lot of time with the AWS team and the integration between the PTP team, AWS, and customers, and sort of bringing everyone together. For a drink, I went back to the Cloud Candy. I thought it was fitting for the conversation. So it's from a brewery called Mighty Squirrel up in the Boston area. So pretty good. We've done a couple of these. I think it's probably the second time I pulled out the Cloud Candy. So I was going to bring a Treehouse just to get Gary, upset, but,
yeah, jealous.
But I forgot it at home this morning. I wasn't really thinking about beer at 5:30.
You're right.
I should have.
That's probably good. Awesome. And really excited to have Eric Zimmerman from AWS with us. Eric, you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Gary, Bill, Ethan, for having me. I guess starting with the drink, unfortunately, mine is less interesting. It's iced coffee right now because it's 3 o'clock here, and I fear my day is not nearly close to over. But normally, and maybe later tonight, you could catch me having a good bourbon or a Japanese single malt are kind of my guilty pleasures. Although I do respect all the local breweries. But yeah, so very nice to meet everyone, here virtually. I am on the business development team at AWS, and I am specifically on the healthcare and life science startup business development team, where we work with kind of the highest priority startups and venture investors that are building cool things on AWS. And then I'm also on the product team as well, as kind of a program manager for the Biotech Blueprint and some of our pre-competitive tools that hopefully we'll get to talk about today.
Fantastic. And I did not mention before, but PTP is an advanced consulting partner with AWS and part of the life sciences competency. So obviously this is our target market. We really feel like we are well positioned to help biotechnology and life sciences organizations really leverage cloud technologies to really drive their business faster. So much of that business is a race against the clock and race against budgets. And so the faster that you can move through lab work and research work and get closer to validation and treatments, et cetera, obviously that's really what drives the business. So excited to be part of this. And I think, really kind of want to dive into the blueprint, but I want to go to Bill first with a question, just kind of a larger scope. So Bill, you've been working with labs and biotechnology and helping them build and run research applications for at kind of a high level about just some of the largest changes in the last 15 years or so that you've seen in biotech organizations and what they can do now that they couldn't do then?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Gary, thanks for that. So I'll step back just a little bit further than that, but my original roots were I was trained as a chemist and worked as a chemist for a number of years. And I loved doing that. I loved the science. I loved being able to participate in that. But one of the things that at that time was kind of unusual is, well, it wasn't unusual for the time, but you'd see these very intelligent scientists. Everyone was working really hard, running these really great experiments. But after they were done, they'd go to Excel, and then they'd have to go to a notebook and start writing things down, and then going back to Excel, and then doing calculations. And the rate of science was just really slow. A lot of computers weren't networked. A lot of the instruments weren't networked as well. So people were walking around with their notebooks all over the place. And I really felt that there was an opportunity at that point to maybe like accelerate this a little bit more. So I went back and got a grad degree in computer science and started to try to really help the industry put those things together. And to answer the question straight away, the largest change that I've seen in biotech and pharma in the last 10, 15 years has been the astounding increase in the velocity of science. Compared to where we were back then to where we are here in 2020, coronavirus aside, the velocity of science has been just mind-numbing. And the rapid adoption of new technologies because of the integration and the advancement of computer science combined with that has further developed increased velocity in science. Along with that, not until maybe more recently, there's been a dramatic lowering of the cost for IT startups. When I've started up, I should have probably counted the number, but there's been more than a few. And the IT budgets for your startups, 10 years ago compared to what they look like today are just unbelievably different. Chief science officers back then, when you'd come to them asking for your IT budget, they would be, kind of like blown away, thinking like, wow, okay, so all of this money that I'm spending for IT, which they view as a cost center, is being taken away from our R&D budget. So, as the years have progressed, like that's been a really positive thing is this cost center, which I argue that it's a value creation center, but chief science officers see it a little differently. It allows it to shift it a little bit more, or at least stagger the investments to mirror the development process, from hit to lead discovery, all the way through, clinical trials to commercialization. You can incrementally add on additional IT investments, whereas in the past it was much harder to do it. You had to buy stacks of servers, get server rooms, get credit lines, being able to wait for these things to be delivered, build operating systems. We all know how this goes, but this was a major part of getting going. And instead of doing science, they were waiting for the networks to be built and things like that. So, we take it for granted, but that's part of the acceleration, is being able to apply this technology to the science. One example I'll give here was kind of in 2002. It was a Dr. Robert Langer company, and he's a pretty well-known guy, Transform Pharmaceuticals. We were there to do form formulation, and form formulation is just a fancy way of getting a active pharmaceutical ingredient, the thing that actually works, into a pill. You have to add in binders, excipients, stabilizers, and then eventually it shows up at your Walgreens or CVS. So we were there to try to help optimize that process. In order to do that, we had to hire mechanical engineers to be able to use like CAD or SolidWorks, design machines, put on actuators, get software engineers to like give it intelligence, database administrators to be able to put the data somewhere, UI designers, and then the scientists. So, that's the opposite way you really want to build it, is you want to have the scientists be the focus, not all of these supporting engineers and IT experts. But that was the requirement in order to be able to do it. And of course, it required a giant on-prem data center with a lot of flashing lights, spinning disks, and a lot of, BTUs being kicked around the data center. So, all that had to be built just to begin the science. Now, that worked out really good. It ended up being acquired by J&J for $250 million, but it took a lot longer than it would, say, in 2020 if we were to try to do the same exact type of thing. So, that's an interesting use case and kind of a marker for, how things, where they were, where they got into the middle stages. And then, over the years, it technologically incrementally advanced, and like you had advanced liquid handling, you had out of the box robotics, imaging started to become a little bit easier. Back in the day, imaging was very like a nightmare. People would have to print it out and then, use calipers to do it. Now we've got computers to do it. So that's done a lot in terms of like cell analysis and feature analysis for cells. So that sped it up quite a bit. Kind of around 2008, there was, I know it was a little before this, but in about 2008, this is kind of when we started to feel like, virtualization was something that was something to put in our data centers. So that enabled us to be able to increase some productivity by getting labs up quicker. You would just get a few servers, you'd have high availability, you'd have VMDKs, so you could roll out new applications a little bit faster. So that was kind of a milestone there that started to change the trajectory of where we were headed from kind of an IT perspective. The network speeds on the WANs, they were still a little bit unreliable, at least in the Cambridge area and things. So cloud kind of wasn't coming into the picture at that stage. But recent years, all that stuff has kind of come together, and now we're at the spot where people are just massively adopting the cloud. And really what that's doing is allowing us to bring the critical applications that, really support assay development, biochemistry function, medchem, doing structure analysis, high throughput screening. We've got some great technologies out there like CRISPR-Cas9. Now we have like Illumina sequencing systems that, sequence the whole genome in like hours. So that's all great. But in order to be able to utilize that, you still need to be able to like rapidly deploy the applications that perform the analysis, run the machines, and do all that. And now a lot of that can be done with a couple clicks through the AWS marketplace. I'm sure Mark will have a lot to add on that, but those are some of the like high points that I see throughout the last several years.
Yeah, can you imagine telling a startup biotech CEO that we can't start lab work for about 3 months because we got to rack equipment and we got cables that are on back order and it takes a while to load software and yeah, it's crazy. So appreciate that. That's it's good to get some context, especially from somebody that's kind of lived through that for a while. So we're calling today's session the Biotech Lab of the Future. So Eric, can you just maybe frame up for the discussion for us and talk about either the problems AWS was trying to solve or the enablement you're looking to provide for biotech firms with the release of the Biotech Blueprint? Just kind of we'll get to that and then we'll kind of get to the meat of what it is a little bit later.
Sure, happy to. So, we fundamentally believe that cloud will and really is transforming kind of every step in bringing therapeutics or diagnostics or devices to market. So, specifically for today in the lab of the future, we're really focusing a lot on the discovery piece, whether it be, the early stage R&D and or preclinical pieces. And we think that, at AWS, we can, help companies move faster and be more efficient and more secure. So how do we think about that? We think about the core infrastructure, so that you're talking about instead of having servers and racks and everything, move to the cloud. There's IP security. There's more access to high performance compute. There's workflow automation. There's a single source of truth. There's compliance. There's GXP best practices. All of these things can fit in under this broad umbrella of what the lab of the future is to make science ops more effective. And then, even going more broadly than that, you can go down the development chain or the value chain into clinical trial transformation. So again, more compliance or trial design or recruitment, data, manufacturing and operations, which Bill touched on a little bit. So again, QA and QC and productivity and security and supply chain, and even commercial enablement with consumer engagement analysis and marketing enablement. So we really believe that the cloud is a platform and a tool that scientists and clinicians can use to help accelerate R&D and time to market and success ultimately. So with that, we kind of divide the lab of the future up into a couple parts. So we think of the first one is automation and kind of Internet of Things. So the idea that if you can increase throughput, whether it be in NGS or even just basic pipetting, you can have more data. You can increase the reproducibility of results with the idea that you can better track experimental design and outcomes. You can capture not only more data, but more metadata, which has been kind of a boon for the industry in really understanding complex biological and chemical functions. There's no silos anymore. You don't necessarily have to have things in physical lab notebooks and compare from one researcher to another. That's all on this automation and IoT kick, which is really, not even just in the commercial space, but in the EDU space as well, has really been a huge win for scientists and clinicians. From there, we also have, workflow optimization, which we can go into a little bit more, although that's not as much on the Biotech Blueprint, and the idea of making science fiction science fact. So, technologies like computational bio and computational chem and data science and machine learning, all of these things which, used to be borderline impossible are now, trivial is a little bit too strong of a word, but really, if you can dream it, you can kind of do it with the cloud. It has that kind of scale, which is an enabling technology that unlike we've ever really had before at this level. And so we, have never been more bullish on the healthcare and life science field and the idea of truly driving incredible research and development forward, and just trying to be a small piece of that pipeline.
That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I am going to use turning science fiction into science fact many times. And I will credit you with it, whether you came up with it or not. But
one of my colleagues actually uses it, so I can't unfortunately take credit for it, but I do like it.
I only know you at this point, so you got it.
Fair.
That's great. Mr. Simmons, so you're managing partner at
My dad's
PTP.
here.
Your dad's here. So your role for us, we all wear lots of hats in smaller companies, but I think you're probably a combination of our CEO, our CTO, our CFO. So just kind of recognizing those responsibilities. When you're speaking with biotech execs, kind of looking at some of those similar things, how do you see the Biotech Blueprint resonating with investors, leaders of growing biotech firms?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the story is a little different based on who you're talking to, but I think the biggest part of having the blueprint conversation is the speed or the acceleration that can take place by leveraging. It doesn't take, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's a blueprint that's there. You can leverage the pieces of it, but you can spin up a data center in 15 minutes per se. But there's just pieces of it that you can do a lot faster. So like we talked about before, it's not this heavy lift to get to the science. You're accelerating that, all the motions to get there. When you start talking to like the CFO, obviously there's conversations around, okay, all this CapEx cost doesn't have to be incurred up front. We also provide the tools, the governance around ensuring that you're optimizing your spend in the cloud and not going off the rails. When you have scientists that want to have accounts and spin up accounts on their own, and they'll spin up this fleet of instances to do their work, and then they forgot to turn it off, or so that. So making sure that all those correct guardrails and governance is in place in their cloud environment. So great conversation speaking with finance and the CFOs of those companies. Then Bill's usually involved in talking on the science side, and he brings the application that they need to do. Okay, this runs used to run on-prem, but hey, you should really run this in the cloud, or run this as a SaaS app, or the best place to run those apps. So depends on who you're talking to in the organization, but I think getting getting to the science faster, because a lot of times what we see happening is that the scientists are dictating the applications. They're telling IT, hey, this is the app that we're going to use. I've used this at 5 other life science companies in the past. We're going to use this app. I need this to run. It gets thrown over the fence to IT, and now IT is scrambling to provide the infrastructure to run it on. If we're able to get this blueprint in front of them and say, hey, it's don't be afraid of it. It can be done. Here's the guardrails to get it going and running, and do it quickly. You can look like the hero from that standpoint, and lends a lot of credibility that the applications that they're using, and then also the infrastructure that they need to run in the cloud to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense, and knowing that you've got, that's obviously this is what we believe in fundamentally as a company, but knowing that you've got the ability to move fast, the ability to scale, but also the appropriate controls that business needs, and especially a CFO needs, that knows I've got a certain amount of kind of stage 1 funding, and we've got to get to a certain place before that runs out. Knowing that there's that cost oversight, I think, is really important. So Eric, I'm going to come back to you, and let's start to dive in a little bit more to the blueprint itself, what it is, but also kind of want to start with, we had a conversation earlier, and you talked about, I thought this is a really good setup, but the 3 fundamental factors as it related to biotech firms and kind of their mission to bringing treatments to market, and that kind of leading into the blueprint, and wondering if you could kind of share those 3 factors with us, and then maybe kind of dive into what the blueprint really is, and how it can be an enabler for the life sciences organizations.
Sure, happy to. So what we kind of saw was amidst the thrill of launching a new venture, IT infrastructures really often an afterthought for a lot of the world's best scientists and clinicians. And so, we at Amazon and AWS specifically, where I am, try to work backwards and think about the infrastructure and applications that are found at successful later stage companies, and work backwards from there and say, what is the lowest common denominator? What do successful companies have in common, and how can we set up these young companies for success but not only for success, make it light enough that we can abstract away as much of the DevOps piece as possible. So, what I would say, the insights when we were doing that analysis that we came across were, one, as we sort of kicked off, science is accelerating via enhanced operations and breakthrough technologies, that we mentioned, and it's accelerating unlike, any time in recent history. Alongside that, we also have data intensive companies, because there is so much data being created and a demand for a true single source of truth, that it's hard to manage data. And when I say manage data, it's not just storing it on a hard drive or a server. It's everything from transforming it, from merging it, running ETL on it, integrating it with third-party apps. There's a lot of things that people need to do with their data to truly unlock the value, that are sometimes underappreciated. And then the third insight is that, scientists are really great at what they do, but often they're not DevOps people, which is understandable. They spend their lives, on the benchtop or reading publications and not necessarily thinking about security and compliance best practices or infrastructure. And so, we at AWS wanted to come up with a way that we could give prescriptive guidance saying, based on what we've seen, this is what really works and has worked over and over and over. And this is sort of what a roadmap or a blueprint for your growth can look like. And so as a result, we created the Biotech Blueprint. And that's basically, it's based on CloudFormation templates. So it's a one-click deployment. It takes about 30 minutes to spin up an environment once you have an AWS account. And it's a way to rapidly and inexpensively create an enterprise-grade research environment in the cloud. So it creates a virtual data center to house scientific applications and experimental data. And not only do that, but it's optimized for security, resilience, compliance, and cost, which I think is also sometimes overlooked. It's not as fun to talk about how do you optimize things for cost, but it's a real need for these companies that are smaller and are resource constrained. I think that was kind of the Gen 1 of that Biotech Blueprint, and we've seen a lot of success with that. But quickly thereafter, we got a lot of requests for, okay, now what? So that's really good if it's like, give me a VPC, give me a VPN, I want to just start cranking. And, it's for small teams. But what about when you need multi-account? What about when you need a data lake? What about when you want to integrate with third-party tools like a Benchling or a Dotmatics? And so, the Biotech Blueprint has expanded from, a product to almost more of a platform-like being to try to accommodate the growth and the interest in the industry.
That's great. So I'll recap just kind of so everybody's staying on point, because I think it's important. So kind of acceleration in science and the speed is kind of unprecedented, single source of truth. And the reality that you're hiring scientists to do great science, not necessarily be DevOps. And so how do we arm those people to be able to do their job and do their job most effectively? And then to your point, not just be at a starting point, but allow the scalability to move throughout the life cycle of a biotechnology firm without these, kind of severe step ups, which can be, really challenging in organizations as they grow to kind of, oh, I've outgrown this platform, I need to move to another. Now I've got to move to another. And those forklift upgrades, that all they do is just slow down business. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that the technology choices, although they may not seem as consequential right at the beginning when you're just running a few workloads or pipelines, they really do have pretty important downstream implications on the speed of research and the success of discovery, whether it be data management, whether it be data generation, or even just, as you mentioned, but just being a true roadblock to expanding at the pace that a company ideally would like to expand. So we really tried to abstract what.
Sorry, I was just going to jump into your point here. Is one other point of this is the choices made early on. A lot of times I've heard the saying, "Oh, we'll just do this for now," and you come back to the company 6 years later, and it's the same thing that's in there. And so the technology choices at day one, they're very, very important, because if you do choose the wrong product that's inferior to the other one, you've actually lost time. And then to get out of that, you're going to have to, reprocure. In the old days, you'd have to, get $100,000 procurement package. You'd have to get rid of your old one. You'd have to migrate the data, and you'd have to retrain your users. So those are some significant costs. So choosing things up front I couldn't understate or overstate what you're saying. It's just exactly.
Definitely. And I think, the number of times that we've heard, we are on the forefront of science, with a Nature publication or so, but have a huge technical debt or are technically bankrupt is astounding. And so it comes back to, we want to enable scientists and clinicians to do what they do best and not have to worry about other, as much of the tech piece as possible. So we can kind of give this prescriptive, guidance on best practices for, how to build a preclinical environment. But then we also need to work with partners like PTP to help, actually implement these solutions and manage them long term too, especially ones with life science competencies, because it's harder than I think people imagine marrying the tech world and the life sciences world. They're two separate languages, and sometimes you need a liaison between them.
Yeah, someone that's maybe not your bioinformatics person as well. Those poor guys typically get this as their role to say, well, you're going to manage the whole AWS account, and then also write all your algorithms, your R scripts and everything like this. So, managing the cloud shouldn't be their job either.
Right. But again, they are impacted because ideally, they can just live in a Jupyter notebook or whatever, but you want to make sure that, all that work that they're doing flows back to a single source of truth or is, managed and locked down appropriately. So again, these are decisions, while not the sexiest, that are very important.
Mm-hmm. So we've continued to have some people pop on that were not here at the beginning. So thank you to those that decided to join, even though you couldn't get all of it. But so we're talking with Simmons on the PTP side about the Biotech Lab of the future. We're going through a number of questions as you're listening. If you've got anything specifically on your own, feel free to hit us up on the Q&A or chat, and I'll be happy to relay that to the panelists. But with that, Bill, I'm going to come back to you based on what Eric was talking about, and maybe if you could think of like a use case from your experience of an organization that you worked with in the past, challenges you were trying to solve for them, and then how maybe the blueprint, if that were in play, if those technologies and the blueprint were in play back then, how that maybe have streamlined their effort, improved their situation, et cetera. Can you come up with any examples? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
There's many to choose from, and it's kind of comes full circle, and I'm happy to be able to have the chance to be on a panel with Eric, because I was able to spend a lot of the time starting in about 2008 to 2013, or even further, but most of Third Rock Ventures Fund 1 companies, I've at least consulted or somehow played a role in talking to those folks, because pretty much every time back then in Fund 1, they would get their Series A, and they would have, $32 million in the bank, and it would be a bunch of scientists. And I was kind of the only computer guy so they said, well, what do we do? How do we build it? And so, over and over again, I would have to go in, and they all had different models. I mean, if they're curing cancer, it could be an anti-angiogenesis, like an Agios, or a Constellation was an epigenetics. And they'd say, well, why does it have to be different at each time? And I says, well, I mean, if you can cure cancer, then, next time you want to cure the same cancer, we'll just do what we did before, but you have to cure it first. So, so the example I'd probably give is in Fund 1, I was over at Constellation Pharmaceuticals. I was employee 5, and I think we were their first portfolio company. And, we ended up eventually a few years getting success, and we got into a partnership with Genentech Roche, and we were collaborating on several small molecule inhibitors. And so it was a really interesting collaboration. They were out in San Francisco, we're out in Cambridge, and then offshore was our chemistry team that was producing the structures. So it was kind of an interesting thing. So the medchem groups on both sides of the continent were doing their designs, sending them across, and then they would send us back a compound. Well, both of our science staff would have to do the first thing, which was register the compounds. Just like a book in a library, you'd have to register them and get an ID. Then when you would do science, the data would be attached to that single truth like we were talking about. Well, if your Dewey Decimal equivalent for chemistry is different, well, you're not going to have a single source of truth. You're going to have two different records, even though the chemical was the same. And that's because registering a chemical is actually very complicated. And if you do things a little bit differently, the algorithm will give it a different name. Now, when you're a Constellation, a little company dealing with Genentech Roche, you do it their way. But we didn't have the budget to kind of do it their way. So we had to look for like different ways to do it. So at that time, we partnered up with a company called Chemaxon. And it was great. These guys had the leading, technology at the time, probably still do. And they worked with us, and they thought it was a great opportunity to, kind of work with a big player, Genentech Roche. So we got with Jeff Blaney's team over at Genentech Roche, the folks over at Chemaxon, and then we spun up the server, installed out, the operating, did all the stuff that took like weeks for our IT team to do. And then we began with our developers to like code in all the custom rules. And, you can guess all the things that were there to follow on. It resulted in a glowing success. We were able to actually, be invited by Chemaxon to present at multiple events that they held and wrote a few white papers based on it. So at the time, that was something groundbreaking. Fast forward to today, if you go look at the blueprint, you can double click on that and install it in about 2 seconds. So, it's just a self-explanatory type of thing, but there's plenty of stories similar to that. Vortex was another one, and I know that's up there, I think, Eric. A few other analytical tools they were using as well. You could just snap those into place, but it took us months and months of time to, procure those and build those. So that would have been something that really would have, helped out if we had that back then.
The difference between months and a couple clicks is radically significant. I think that rings truth, I think, to all of us, times the one commodity that we can't control. Appreciate that, Bill. So Ethan, I'm going to come to you, and I alluded to this, when Eric was kind of taking us through the blueprint, and we were talking about kind of the life cycle, and I've been through this, and I know you have, but in the career, either organizations you've been part of or you've helped go through, again, big application migrations or big forklift upgrades. The biggest problem with those situations is, for the most part, they don't advance anything with your real business or improve, what you're trying to do with the customer. It's simply, hey, I'm bigger than I was before, and I need different platforms to manage the data that I'm in. So I think of that kind of stuff as it's a distraction to business if you've got to stop and change and upgrade and migrate. So the blueprint that we're talking about is part of kind of that life cycle plan, right? So that you don't have to go through that process. So the question, to you is just based on, kind of where you sit. How do you see, that blueprint and AWS spanning how can it help companies span that significant of a change from early stage all the way through up to manufacturing? And then how does that ultimately accelerate revenue for the organizations? Because, at the end of the day, these are all businesses. And so they've kind of got to make things work. And can you, just from a business standpoint, can you address a couple of those things?
Yeah, I think, a couple pieces just from, recent startups or, sort of progressed along the way. They've gotten to a point where they're going through commercialization, and they're, all of a sudden they're bringing in sort of salespeople into the organization where, and they have certain expectations for CRM and ordering and ERP, and all of a sudden you need all this whole set of tools. So you've gotten sort of past the science. So it's taking you from zero to science to revenue, and that piece again, Bill can probably speak to it because he's been with companies that have gone IPO, and that whole process again took a long time. But now a customer came to us and said, hey, we're deploying this commercialization package, and we want to deploy it in AWS, and we need it in 3 weeks. Before you never could have done that sort of on-prem in a data center. And oh yeah, by the way, we have salespeople on every continent, and they need access to this at the same time. So to be able to deploy from a compliance standpoint, being compliant in the US, GDPR in Europe, name the and even different if you're in Germany than if you're in Ireland, but be able to deploy that quickly. So I think that you're able to not only say you're accelerating the research, but you're also accelerating sort of the time to revenue as well. So and that's just one example of recent customer that's got that. And I think too, a lot of times you're having people that are saying it wasn't the IT team that was deciding on what the commercialization platform was. The IT team found out dead last that, hey, this is the software that you're responsible for owning and deploying. Go get it done. And we see a lot of times IT is sort of raising their hand, asking for help, saying, hey, some of the teams are new to living in the cloud and working with AWS, or just don't have that experience, and having something that we can put in front of them that sort of walks them through it and gives them, again, I keep on saying guardrails, but let's do this and do it carefully and do it with compliance and governance and everything that we need, so that you're not the one that's on the news that released all these patient records because you didn't have your RDS database locked down properly, or when you deployed this application, great, but you didn't check the right box for encryption. So stuff, it's really, again, it's all encompassing, but at the same time you're trying to help get them to that steady state a lot faster than they would have without the blueprint in place. So, and we've said the word blueprinter a lot. Sometimes it's a blueprint, sometimes it's a roadmap, sometimes it's sort of it's a
framework
to get to.
Yeah.
A framework. So it's different for every company too. But what's nice about it, if you look at it, and we're happy to share more information about it too, but you can see where those applications plug in. When Bill's saying, hey, I double clicked on this app. Okay, yeah, I launched it. It's from the marketplace. I installed it. I'm up and running. Obviously, you still need to provide care and feeding of that environment. And some of what we're also doing for customers is that's the same thing. Like, okay, great, you got us there quickly, but at the same time, I don't want to go out and hire a fleet of cloud architects and can you do this for me as a service? So one of the things that PTP has been adding for additional value to the blueprint, because granted you can get the environment spun up quickly, so it doesn't take a fleet of engineers and consulting time to make that happen, but there still is governance and compliance and manage that environment post while it's in production. And that's one of the other values that PTP brings to the conversation as an AWS partner.
Great. So I know the Biotech Blueprint's relatively hot off the presses, but Eric, wondering if you can just share some of the feedback that you've received, or any of the kind of the wins from the organizations that you put it in play or had discussions with, and just kind of what the initial response has been out in the biotechnology market.
Sure. So I would say it's generally been pretty positive overall. There's certainly been some road speed bumps as we've been trying to figure out this kind of lowest common denominator, because everyone who really cares about this seems to have a pretty strong opinion of what is a best practice really looks like, as you can imagine. Yeah. So again, we wanted to get something that, to use an analogy, it's almost like a flower box. We'll give you that basic structure, but whatever you do to plant inside of it and foster growth and make look beautiful, that's up to you, and we encourage that. And so that's, again, another reason why we have to lean on consulting partners like PTP to help companies. And so the idea is that, if we were able to make it as easy as possible to deploy, so we do that using a quick start and cloud formation templates, as I mentioned, but it really is, a 1-click or 2-click deployment. It takes about 30 minutes, and there's even a full deployment guide and everything for the Biotech Blueprint. And, we make that just, available. Ideally companies will have more time and more funds to focus on what I would call the really fun stuff, right? Doing what's really differentiating them in the market. I think we have lots of companies that are currently built on it. And as Bill mentioned, we've worked closely with Third Rock Ventures, and a lot of their portfolio companies have built, deployed the Biotech Blueprint and have helped us kind of refine it over time, along with a bunch of other companies, and it's now being more widely adopted kind of throughout the life sciences world. So it's cool to see it kind of start, as a nascent idea and grow and really truly become, we'd like to think is kind of a gold standard or best practice that's accessible for really everyone. You don't have to raise a $50 million Series A to have it, but if you do, it's good enough for you as well.
That's great.
Eric, you had mentioned before in a past conversation that how many companies do you know of that are running it now? And I know that compared to the demand that you guys are seeing for interest in it today.
So I was just pulling up those most recent stats that I had been running. I think so. I can only get so specific, but I mean it's in the probably just sub 100 or so. But collectively, I mean, I was just looking at like the top 50 companies that are running it, and they've raised over $4 billion or so collectively in equity capital. So I mean, there are some really, really large names in the space that are building on it right now.
It's impressive. So got a question from the attendees. So I'm going to present this out to the group. So whoever, raise your hand or jump in if you want to field this. But the question is, how do you see the change in the instrument world where the software that controls the device in the office is in the cloud? Bill or Eric?
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab at this. So yeah, I used to work as an analytical chemist on HPLCs and mass spec, so I know exactly what Michael's asking. Yeah, I used to attend like LRIG and the Laboratory Robotics Interest Group in Cambridge. So I'm familiar with what you're asking here, and it could be a even broader question because there are many instruments that have analogous type of architectures. And anything could happen here on this, and maybe there are some other creative ways to get around this. But for the most part, I think you're going to see a PC stay there. A lot of these things, require real-time control, either through onboard microchips or PLCs for real-time. These are complex instrumentations. Having said that, the days of kind of having that C drive be where the data flows to, I think you'll start to see that go away. And instead, what you might start to see are appliances like the AWS Gateway. And a lot of companies have been working with PTP to deploy this. And what it is essentially it's a storage device that's on-prem where you could point your Waters instrument, for example, to float the data directly to the AWS Gateway, and from there, AWS has released essentially an image that will sync it up to your S3 bucket. So it's pretty neat because as your data is flowing off, it'll cache it locally. So because I know everyone's gonna say, well, no, I need to analyze it right away, and our connection could be slow or down. So it caches it locally, which means that you can have one of your offline analysis station or your laptop point to the gateway and do the analysis, so it'll be local. Or maybe you just go home and you're at home kicking around. You can go up into your AWS account to your analysis toolbox up there, and you'll point at your S3 bucket and do the analysis there. So I think just as a general type of thing for mass spec and any type of instrumentation systems. It solves a number of problem statements, such as like, backup and being able to distribute data, those type of things. So I don't know, hopefully, Michael, that answers your question, but that's my take on it.
I think one thing we're also seeing at AWS is that analysis are becoming increasingly multimodal, I guess is what I would say, and that there needs to be some amount of data ingestion in order to really do some of the complex analysis. So it's not, it's not just, one thing's coming off mass spec. There's lots of metadata, and then you want to run that against publicly or open accessible data, or you want to run that against previous experiments. And so we're finding that the data ingestion piece has been one of the kind of key value drivers that we've found for healthcare and life science companies in managing the data that are coming off these tools. And ideally, that's sort of what leads companies to creating a best-in-class data lake. So that's sort of the next step in my mind, Bill.
Yeah, and Eric, to just kind of play on that, it's a little off the initial question, but one of our, it's a new code that just came up in. I'm pretty sure most of the companies that are in Cambridge doing research are going to run into this, but they're CROs that are producing either the chemistry data or their biochemistry data, animal data, ADME, whatever it is most likely in some other continent, and they've been wondering how can they deal with this, and so we've been able to set up S3 buckets in, for example, Singapore. And then from there, relay that over to US East through the AWS backbone. It's been super efficient. It's super secure. It lands in their bucket. What's great after that is, you had mentioned before about, transforming the data. Well, you can put a step function right there. So you can convert your CSV files, you can parse them and convert them and, do a lot of this stuff and then maybe end up with a data lake. So, by diversifying that using S3, and AWS technologies, they've been great. So they wake up in the morning, they get an email report from all of the data experiments that had come in the night before, and the scientists just go to their bucket and just go to town. So there's less emails, there's less questions. What about these large image files? That was the big thing here is they've got like 4K image files. How do you get them from, China or India or wherever over to US East efficiently? So no more FTP servers or any of this other stuff. It's just streamlined. So people have been pretty happy with that one recently too.
Fantastic. Well, we are right up at the top of the hour. It's always amazing to me when we plan an hour for this and it feels like it blows by. I wanted to mention to attendees, if there are further questions that you have or interest in taking this conversation further, want to know more about, how PTP might be able to help. If you have an account manager, great, reach out to them. If not, hit us up at marketing@ptp.cloud or just go to the website and there's plenty of ways to get in touch with us there, and we'll be happy to have Bill or, Aaron Jeske or a number of one of our experts kind of reach out to you and we'll get things going. So, but wanted to thank everybody, the attendees, for staying with us. And then just ask the panelists any parting shots, anything that we didn't ask that you feel like want to get off your chest and share about the conversation that we're having this afternoon before we wrap.
I can go first on that. So what I would say is, as much time as we've spent on this, it is certainly an iterative process, and it's not even close to being done. In the spirit of, open data and collaboration, like, we want more feedback. We are looking for more examples of, true best practices and people that are interested in kind of helping out, other scientists and clinicians and healthcare and life science companies. And so, if you want to have a conversation about what you're doing that you think is really cool, or you have questions about what, you should be doing, or, what have we seen that's worked, we're always happy to have those discussions, and that's what we're here for. And I would like to say a quick thank you for organizing this PTP. We really, again, Biotech Blueprint is great, and you can deploy it pretty easily, but again, then it becomes to what you do with it. And so working with advanced consulting partners that have that true life science competency is invaluable for us. So we appreciate the work that you do.
And thanks for your time this afternoon. It's fun. Bill, Ethan, anything from you guys before we wrap?
No, I think for, other than cheers, I'm out of a beer. I need another beer. But no, I think for us, the big thing is just being able to help out. I mean, Eric and I, met via another AWS resource, via another conversation, and AWS can be a monstrous beast to navigate, and we're happy to help out. So if a lot of times customers come to us and say, hey, I need to know an AWS person that knows life sciences or knows this product really well or whatever. So we're here as part of the partner piece, not only to help with the technology, but also help navigate the relationships and make sure that the work that every business is doing, they feel it's the most important business in the world, and to them it is, and we can help connect them with the right people at AWS to get them the support and the resources that they need to be more successful. And so we're happy to play that role as well.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you again. Thank you to the attendees, Eric, Bill, Ethan. Appreciate you guys being part of this, and hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon and a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, Gary.
Great.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Gary.